So in that case, what we do, we cannot use such lead as it is. So we take them and then we dissect the structure, and then we arrive at a structure so that will have good properties and serve the purpose. Okay, you will see a couple of very good examples. Then you will look at the lead compounds what we obtained from nature to develop CNS drugs. Again, so these drugs can be agonists or antagonists. We'll see when we go to such class of compounds, and then we will look at some anti-cancer drugs that are developed based on the lead compound what we obtained from the nature, and then antibiotics. Maybe natural or synthetic. I will give explanation when we go to the chapter. And then cardiovascular drugs. Okay, so to treat hypertension or whatever, you will see some leads that are employed to develop cardiovascular drugs as well. And then anti-asthmatic agents or anti-asthmatic drugs. You will see some compounds here also. And then anti-parasitic drugs. Okay, so you will see, for example, quinine and artemisinin and things like that. So I will go through mainly structures. I will emphasize on structures because this is pharmaceutical chemistry. So I will just go behind the structure and I will explain what is going on with the structure to modify the structure to its analog form or derivative form to achieve the better therapeutic value. Okay, so before I start, don't be surprised because when I say natural lead compounds, so as of now, you may see dramatic updates. Okay, so which you must have seen in your practice when you were in when you have undergone training or doing your service in the clinic or in the pharmacy, hospital, wherever. Okay, so my concern is to take structure that was obtained from nature, and then some modifications to give a base. From that base, many new drugs must have originated. So you must have seen in the current scenario. Okay, so I may not touch those the presently existing latest drugs, but most of them are there. But if you don't think that it is not covered or something, because when you say natural lead compound, it's a very big content. So okay, but because I have to complete this in 2 hours, so I just simplified and I put it in a very abstract form. I hope you will enjoy it. If you have any questions, you can just ask before I navigate to next slide, so that I can answer and go to next slide and discuss the new things. Okay, just in brief. So in span of 10 years, from 1983 to 1994, 11 years, 520 new pharmaceuticals approved. So out of 520, 39% of them were derived from natural products. So mainly antibacterials and anti-cancers, they accounted up to 60 or over 60%. And then again between 1990 to 2000, out of 21 drugs derived from natural products were launched on the market by major pharmaceutical companies. So actually I was supposed to connect the structure with the inventor and the pharmaceutical company. Then it goes back to a kind of history information. So I didn't want to do that. So just as a pharmaceutical chemistry researcher or as a learner, so what is needed? So from that point of view, I extracted the information and I prepared this slide. Okay, so whatever I show, that is perfectly fine. Okay, some of the drugs that are derived from natural products between 1990 to 2000, various drugs are there. So just to give you a flavor, I just took some. Okay, so that are used as anti-diabetics or anti-malarials or antibiotics, anti-cancer, or to treat a disease called Alzheimer's disease or arthritis. Okay, then as a parasiticide, and then to treat some of the cancer disorders and things like that. Okay, so these are the most familiar names what you have come across during your graduation, and these are the inventors who are completely involved in inventing that. Then they own the property, that is intellectual property in the form of patents, and then they developed new drugs and released into the market to encash their profit also. Okay, let us start with very commonly known lead compound, that is morphine. So we know its nature and also we know its origin. So this morphine is mainly a centrally acting drug. So this is this is called alkaloids because it contains nitrogen, and it is isolated from Papaver somniferum, that is poppy capsule. It was in 1803 by a German pharmacist called Sertuner, and finally, when he isolated, he named it after Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. Okay, so here opium, as you can see in this picture, when you take a poppy capsule and make a tiny scratches, it elutes kind of fluid or latex, and when you allow it to dry, then it will give you a gum type of substance. So when you take that gum type of substance and look for its actual constituent, so that would give you about 20 other types of alkaloids. So out of these 20, the 4 are very, very important. Out of 4, the first one is morphine, that accounts to 10%, the total 10% of the total quantity. And then codeine, it is found at 0.5%. And then thebaine and papaverine, they are there, but to a very less content, to a very less extent. Morphine, its main property is analgesic property, and codeine, it shows both analgesic property and antitussive property, and thebaine, it shows anticonvulsant property, whereas papaverine, it shows antispasmodic property. So what I will do is, as a lead compound, I will take morphine structure and then I will dissect the structure by 2 different ways. Then I'll show you different derivatives, and then I'll show you their properties, mainly pharmacological properties and also the side effects, toxicity properties. Okay, so before we jump in, we have to understand, all right, morphine we obtained from Papaver somniferum, the poppy capsule, fine. And we isolate and we characterize, and now we have a pure form, that is also fine. But when we administer that into a system, okay, where does it go? We know that it is going to CNS, fine, but will it contact any, its respective receptor? So that we should try to understand. But when it comes to receptors, normally we see 3 types of receptors. So they are called opioid receptors. So it may be mu receptors, and it may be kappa receptor or delta receptors. If it is mu receptors, it could mediate any of the following effects, starting from analgesia, euphoria, addiction, respiratory depression, and constipation. So just in a simple way, the definition of euphoria is a pleasant feeling of well-being and freedom from anxiety and stress. Okay, so here under mu receptors, you can find 5 properties, but 2 of them are indicated with blue color. One is addiction, other one is respiratory depression. Well, these 2 are very risky when we talk about mu receptors, but still we'll account and we'll see the next one. Okay, we have kappa receptors. Again, it mediates the following effects. Number 1, analgesia, and then sedation and diuresis. But kappa receptors never account for addiction, respiratory depression, and constipation. And then delta receptors, they mediate the following effects like analgesia, immunostimulation, and respiratory depression. Well, out of these 3, if I ask you wisely to select the receptor that is good to develop agents, normally we can select kappa receptors because it never comes up with unwanted properties like addiction or respiratory depression or constipation. Okay. Before I go to next slide, somebody typed me that why these are blue. So I took the blue which are really serious. That means we cannot ignore them. We have to consider them. Then we should see whether we can avoid or not. But we cannot go with that. Suppose if we have a drug molecule, if it is showing addiction, we cannot use such drugs strictly when we have good option. When we don't have good option, then we can just proceed with that, because we have some drugs, they cause addiction, they cause the addiction. But when there is no choice, depending on the situation, we have to use it. When we have a good choice, we cannot use one that is showing addiction. Okay, and then kappa, yes, correct, exactly. So kappa receptor, in order to develop good analgesic agent which can show its activity on CNS, kappa receptor is the best one to consider and develop the more efficient molecule. Okay, let us take a look at morphine chemical structure, because you should be familiar with structure and then numbering, because at the later stage I will say position 3 or position 6 or position 7, 8, 17 and like that. But you must know what I'm trying to speak. Okay, so before that, morphine is a prototype of opioid analgesics, and it is pentacyclic alkaloid. You can count 5 ring systems. We have ring A, B, C, D, and then E. E is 5-membered ring with ether oxygen, so that is furan ring. We can also call it as epoxy ring. I'll just tell you the characteristic feature of the structure. So when you look at the structure, you can see ring A, which is completely aromatic. My dear friends, please, if you have piece of paper and pen, quickly write the structure and write the numbering pattern, so that you will be familiar. When I go to next slide and when I say ring A, you must know what I'm referring to, because my explanation should coincide with the structure, because we are reading structures. So better quickly write down the structure meantime when I'm explaining, and when you go to next slide it will be easy for you. Okay, so we have ring A, which is completely aromatic. We have ring E, contains epoxy oxygen, ether oxygen. We can also call it as epoxy ring. And then we have ring C, that is saturated. I can say partially saturated, because still carbon 7 and carbon 8 they are unsaturated. And when we come to ring B, it is a bridge for ring A and ring C. So if you account carbon 12 and carbon 11 unsaturation, ring B is still partially saturated. And then if you come to ring D, it is completely saturated, in the sense it contains only single bond. And then at position 17 we have nitrogen, so which is tertiary in nature, and it carries a simple alkyl group, that is methyl group. So now we are going to understand the impact of benzene ring in the structure, and then phenolic hydroxy group at position 3, and then ether oxygen at position between carbon 4 and carbon 5, and then alcoholic hydroxy group at carbon 6 on ring C, and then methyl group on nitrogen at position 17. Okay, so and then also double bond between carbon 7 and 8. So we are going to understand the importance of these structural features in terms of the good analgesic activity and also very severe side effect. Okay, so we know that morphine is nearly 10 to 20 folds selective for mu receptors and proposed to produce its effects through it. So we know that when it binds to mu receptors, the side effects are addiction and respiratory depression. This is what we see with morphine. So that is why morphine is not officially used as drug, because of its severe side effect. Otherwise, morphine is ultimate for its analgesic property. Okay, and somebody's name is in Arabic. Is it possible to change it to English so that I can mark your attendance also same time? Okay, so A is unsaturated, correct, because that is phenolic in nature, and B is super saturated, no, not completely, because B, if you see, there is a bridge between ring A and ring B, that is carbon 11 and 12. You can see unsaturation there, and then ring C is semi-saturated. In the sense, yes, because of 7 double bond. Okay. Okay, now let us move to the next slide. So here we have the morphine structure. Here what I did is we have phenolic hydroxy group and we have alcoholic hydroxy group. So I considered R1 as a substituent and R2 as a substituent on ring C. Suppose if we change R1 to CH3, the structure will be codeine. Okay, and then if you convert R1 and R2 as acetyl group, then the compound becomes heroin. I don't know how do you pronounce heroin or heroin. Okay, but heroin or heroin, we know that it is very dangerous chemical. Okay, officially it is not at all considered anywhere in any corner of the world. Okay, but in some of the places, if someone spot with this substance, then that's it, legally that he can be punished in whatever the way according to the law of the country. Okay, so just below the structure we have the same structure of morphine. We have the same structure of morphine, except the chemistry on nitrogen is different. In morphine, what we have is methyl, but in nalorphine, what we have is allyl group. So what is the behavior of morphine and nalorphine? Morphine is agonist, nalorphine is antagonist. So see the beauty of the groups what we see in the structure. So this methyl group, it imparts for agonist property when it binds to its respective receptor, whereas allyl group what we have here, it shows antagonist property. That means we cannot see any analgesic property. Then what is the use of this antagonist compound? It is very much used as antidote in case if there is any intentional or unintentional ingestion of this very toxic compound, that is morphine or heroin or whatever other derivative. Okay, so here onwards, what I will do is I will try to show, I will try to do some peripheral modifications. That means around the structure, and try to derive at a analog or a derivative. Then try to see the differences between the analog and parent for its pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamics as well as the side effects. Okay, so codeine, something is missing here. Please make a note of it. If you are seriously writing down the structure, there is CH3 on this figure, structure which is missing. Now I wrote it. All right. So anyway, previously you have seen, okay, the structure what we have here is codeine, because the phenolic hydroxy is transformed to methoxy group. So here we have the codeine name. So here, the reaction what we did to make this group is methylation. If you go back to organic chemistry and connect with the type of reaction, and then if you do ethylation, so that means if you convert methoxy to ethoxy, then it will be 3-ethyl morphine. And then if you do acetylation, that means if you add acetyl group, you will get acetyl morphine. So that means you get 3 derivatives depending on 3 different types of reactions. Okay, so are they same in terms of activity? Here what we can see is we can see decrease in analgesic activity and also addiction property. That is the reason why codeine shows less analgesic activity compared to morphine. But it picks another activity, that is antitussive activity. So that is why codeine is one of the popular active constituent in cough mixtures to suppress the cough. Okay, so the 3-hydroxy group should be free in order to bind to its receptor and show analgesic activity. See, and again the codeine, it shows analgesic activity. You know how it reaches the CNS, it loses CH3 group. That means it picks the hydroxy group back. That means the morphine structure is retained. Then it can bind to the receptor and show its analgesic activity. Okay, so now we are going to look at modification on this group, at sixth place. So what are the, again, here the functional group what we have is hydroxy, but if you look closely, this one is phenolic hydroxy group and this one is alcoholic hydroxy group. Well, some of the reactions are common to both phenolic and alcoholic hydroxy group. Okay, but some, for example, oxidation, if you do oxidation of this, then the compound becomes highly unstable. And if you do oxidation at sixth place, perfectly fine. We will get a compound that is morphinone. So now we should see if we keep groups at the sixth place, will it behave similar to morphine or different? That we should identify. Okay, so at position 6 also we can do methylation. When we do methylation, we get a compound called heterocodeine. Please make a note, I am not giving you the structure, but I am showing you where we are doing the reaction, respective chemical reaction, and what is the name of such a reaction, and what's the product we are going to get, and the product is better than lead compound or not. So that we are going to compare. Okay, so methylation, we get heterocodeine. If you do ethylation, we get 6-ethyl morphine. Acetylation, we get 6-acetyl morphine, and oxidation to ketone, we get morphinone. The structure is right here. Now, all these 4 compounds, they will have increased activity compared to morphine, and also they will have more addiction. So that means this group is known for increasing its activity as well as addiction. So that means we didn't do reduction in the addiction liability. So that means we should look for other options where we can see molecule with similar activity with reduced side effects. Okay, so peripheral modification. Now I'm referring position 7 and 8. You know where that position 7 and 8. 7 and 8 double bond. It is on ring C. Okay, so when we take out the double bond, we can do this by where the chemical reaction that is called reduction. Okay, so when we do reduction, we get a compound called dihydromorphine. So when we get an analog called dihydromorphine, what about its activity? Activity is retained. So that means double bond is not important. We can keep the bond or we can remove the bond. It makes no difference. So that means it is really not necessary for the structure to show, or keep activity. Now I am coming to N-methyl group, which was there at position 17 on ring D. Here we go. I am referring to this nitrogen. Very, very important. Please pay attention because it can make the compound agonist or antagonist. Okay. Suppose if we remove that methyl group, we get a compound called normorphine. What about its pharmacological activity? It will show only quarter the activity of 1/4 of the activity of morphine. That means methyl group is so important for analgesic activity. So suppose if N-methyl group may participate to binding or the NH of morphine, normorphine is not tolerated by the receptor. One more thing, remember I said CNS receptors, and then I said morphine as agonist or antagonist. So what does it mean? Agonist or antagonist, it should go and bind to the receptor. When it binds to the receptor, it should speak to the receptor in terms of its respective interactions. So that can be ionic interaction or van der Waals or hydrogen or dipole, ion dipole, whatever you studied before. So nitrogen, we know that it can quaternize and it can retain plus charge. So plus charge of morphine can speak to minus charge of the receptor for ionic interaction. So the plus charge can be formed only when it contains methyl group, because when it contains methyl group, the valency of nitrogen is tertiary. So when you add a proton, it transforms to quaternary. So that means it picks plus charge. it peaks, nitrogen, it peaks plus charge. So plus charge of the morphine can look at minus charge of the receptor. Minus charge of the receptor, which is accounted for ionic interaction. So that means if you remove methyl group, nitrogen may not appear with plus charge. As a result, we may not see ionic interaction. So when we can't see ionic interaction, then the agonist cannot sit tightly with the receptor. As a result, obviously we may see less activity. Okay, so give reasons to, although morphine is well absorbed from GIT, it has low oral activity. So you should remember this, because morphine undergoes extensive first pass metabolism in the liver through glucuronide conjugation of the 3-hydroxy group. So here the glucuronide conjugation we know, so it is like transforming the molecule from the non-polar state to polar state. So once when morphine exists with the polar form, it cannot cross blood-brain barrier and reach CNS. So that is the reason why codeine is more non-polar and heroin is much more non-polar, and it is highly potent. Okay, so that is also we should connect. But now let us continue with the peripheral modifications. Suppose the N-methyl group, we are going to touch 3 things. Number 1, we are going to change the chemistry of N-methyl group, and also we are introducing hydroxy group at carbon 14, and then we are going to convert hydroxy group at 6 to carbonyl group. So when we do these 3 modifications, what are we going to achieve? We are going to achieve some antagonists. So opioid antagonists, they reverse or antagonize the effects of morphine. So then the main use of these compounds are as antidotes in opioid overdose. So we have naloxone and we have naltrexone. Let us see what I explained here. The 3 changes that are there in these 3 structures are not. See, at position 6, alcoholic hydroxy group is oxidized. Yes. At position 14, hydroxy group is introduced. Yes. And then at position 17, the methyl group is extended to, or converted to N-allyl group. Okay, so here it is cyclopropyl group. And the same changes here. So as a result, these 2 are excellent antidotes or antagonists. Okay, so nuclear modifications, again, now we are going to scissor the nucleus of the morphine structure. So here what we are doing, whatever the 5-member ring was here, we are going to dissect that. So that means it is removed. As a result, we get 2 compounds, and they assume that this is a mirror. We know that they are mirror images, and we have dextroform here. We call it as dextrorphenol, and levoform here we call it as levorphenol. And both of them behave differently because they are optical compounds. So here dextrorphenol has no analgesic activity, and levorphenol has 5 times the more potency of morphine. And we have another compound called levolorphan, and this compound, it acts as opioid antagonist. Now go back and see what I said about antagonist property. So whatever the chemistry we have on nitrogen that determines the molecule is agonist or antagonist. So if we have methyl, perfectly it is agonist. If we have allyl, unsaturated allyl group, then it is antagonist. Okay, so this compound is 5 times more potent than nalorphine, what we have seen just now in the previous slide. And then levorphenol, it shows 5 times more potency of morphine. So dextromethorphan, it is free from morphine analgesic property, but it picks up antitussive property with no addicting effect. So dextromethorphan is one of the active constituent in cough mixtures. Okay, so let us come back to nuclear modifications. So here what we are doing is we are dissecting ring E and ring C. So there was ring C here, that is gone. There was ring E here, 5-member ring, even that is detected, dissected. So the structure what we have here is pentazocine, but the chemistry of methyl or nitrogen is completely changed. Now it is branched allyl group. Okay, so now let us see how this pentazocine behaves. So pentazocine, it is popular with a brand name called Talvin. It shows mixed agonist and antagonist property. So that means it shows agonist at kappa receptors and antagonist at mu receptors. So 1/3 the analgesic activity of morphine with low addiction, what we can say with pentazocine. So this is some of the clinical uses are like it is marketed in USA as analgesic, and it is combined with aspirin, and then it is combined with naloxone also to prevent intravenous abuse. So pentazocine has hallucinogenic side effects due to stimulation of sigma receptors, okay, which are considered as non-analgesic receptors. So now we are going to look at nuclear modifications where we see opening of ring E, C, and B. So these type of compounds, they belong to a chemical class called phenylpiperidines. So we have a compound called meperidine and fentanyl. So let us see how they behave. So meperidine originally developed as a cocaine analog spasmolytic. 1/4 of the analgesic activity of morphine it exhibits. It shows faster onset, shorter duration, and less addicting. And clinical uses are obstetric analgesic, not preferred as it passes the placenta and may lead to the delivery of infants with depressed respiration. And it can be used as pre-anesthetic medication. As a morphine substitute, it is used in maintenance therapy of morphine addiction. And fentanyl, if we come, it shows very potent nature. That is, it shows nearly 100 times analgesic activity of morphine. It is very faster. It shows faster onset and a shorter duration, and it is used as analgesic and anesthetic. Also, you must have studied when we look at balanced anesthesia. We use analgesic, in case of general anesthetics, when you look at balanced anesthesia, we see general anesthetic agent, we see analgesic agent, and we see skeletal muscle relaxants. So preferably the analgesic agent will be fentanyl there, or any other powerful analgesic agent. Okay, so nuclear modifications where we are scissoring ring E, C, B, and D. So the compound what we have is methadone. It falls under chemical class called phenylpropylamines. Methadone has a similar action to morphine but less addicting, longer acting, and orally active. It is used as an analgesic for severe pain and as morphine substitute in maintenance therapy of morphine addiction. And these two, they belong to a propoxyphene what we have here, and methadone what we have here. Because of the stereochemistry, for example, D isomer, it shows analgesic activity with half the potency of codeine, and L isomer, it shows antitussive action only. So finally, the red structure what is displayed, that is the lead compound structure, and the thick drawing what is there on that structure, that is the pharmacophore what is needed for analgesic activity. If you take the structure right from morphine till fentanyl, nobody can touch this benzene ring and then this carbon until this nitrogen, and then the methyl group. So in case if you disturb the things that are circled in blue, then dramatic loss of analgesic activity one can see. Okay, you can remove this ring E, or you can remove this ring C. You can dissect this ring B, and you can dissect even this ring D also. But if you eliminate any one carbon from whatever the thick red line is drawn, there one can see a loss of analgesic activity or complete reduction in the analgesic activity. So a phenyl ring, what I'm showing here, or an isosteer also will work for analgesic property, okay, which should be directly attached to the quaternary carbon. And then here the central quaternary carbon atom, which is with a tertiary nitrogen in case of fentanyl, that is important. And then the tertiary nitrogen having small substituent and separated from the quaternary carbon by 2 carbon atoms. So this is the pharmacophoric features of the morphine, what we see from the lead compound. Okay, so this is all about morphine story. Now I'm going to switch to other compound, because this is a structure what we have seen. So it can penetrate blood-brain barrier, reach CNS, and bind to its respective receptor and show its analgesic property. Okay, so here what we have seen until now is the lead compound as such can show a powerful analgesic property, but it comes up with addicting liabilities. Okay, so to drop that addicting liabilities, what we do is we do some structural changes and we try to retain analgesic property to the same extent or to a better extent or to some extent, to a less extent, but we try to minimize its side effects completely. So that's what we did from peripheral modification until nuclear modification. As a result, we have seen so many structures. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer. Then I will switch over to anti-cancer. Any questions until now? Okay, I assume no question. Okay, let us look at the lead compounds what we obtain from nature to treat cancer. Okay, so in 1949, Canadian researchers at the University of Western Ontario began investigating the medicinal properties of the rosy periwinkle, from the family called Catharanthus roseus. So what we've obtained from this beautiful flower plant was two important active principles, the secondary metabolites. So one is vinblastine, other one is vincristine. Okay, so we have the structure here. So the vinblastine, it was for non-small cell lung cancer to treat small non-small cell lung cancer, and also lymphoblastic leukemia and non-Hodgkin's lymphomas. Okay, so we have vinblastine here. And then we have some structural changes. I'll just explain, what is going on in this structure. If you look at the structure, it is not that simple. It is very complex. It is very complex, and the beauty of the structure is it is not like morphine. If you try to remove any functional group, straight away we can see big change in its activity. That means always loss of activity. Always loss of activity. Okay, and this structure is really challenging for medicinal chemists to make a total synthesis of this. We can obtain as it is from the nature, from the plant. We can extract, purify, blah blah blah. But many research groups have attempted to synthesize this compound, but till today they could not do it. The reason is, if you look at the structure, it has various stereo centers. So it is very, very difficult to make the one that is available in the nature. Very, very difficult. So that's the reason no one till today achieved synthesis of this compound. But what we can do, we can take the lead compound and whatever functional groups are here. For example, in this structure, the functional groups are hydroxy, and then we have ester group here, and then we have secondary amine here, and then again we have amide here and hydroxy group here. So what we can do is we can tag some groups there. That is all we can do. That means we can isolate from the nature, and then we can develop some derivatives or analogs through semi-synthetic method. I refer semi-synthetic. So that means we obtain the lead from the nature, Then by one or two steps, we chemical reaction, we arrive or we obtain different new compound. So that's why I refer it as semi-synthetic. For example, you have various antibiotics. Okay, even almost all antibiotics are semi-synthetic in case if they are obtained from the nature. Okay, organism may do the skeleton, the main scaffold. Then you add the group and make many derivatives. Anyway, you will see those things later. Okay, now pay attention. You have the structure. So what I'm showing with the cursor. So now something is going on here. What is going on here? So nitrous acid is added and it is converted into diacetyl vinblastine amide. It is called as vindesin. This can be prepared through this route also. So here what we did, we have CONH2. So we treated hydrazide here, and here what we have here is the ester group. Okay, so this ester group, again when you treat it with ammonia and methanol, it can be hydrolyzed. It can be hydrolyzed and it can be converted into amide. So we have amide group here, azide derivative. So if you add ammonia, you get this, vindesin. Okay, so we have vincristine and vinblastine. That depends what the R is. Okay, so where is that R, which is here? So this R decides the compound is vinblastine or vincristine. So these two are naturally occurring plant metabolites, secondary metabolites, known for anti-cancer property. Okay, so what I showed here is like the derivatives. So these derivatives are made sometimes to increase the potency of a compound. So now the anti-proliferative activity of vincristine or vinblastine is related to their specific interaction with the tubulin. I am trying to explain about mechanism of action. So when they interact with specific tubulin, they're preventing assembly of tubulin into microtubules and they're arresting cell division. So that is how they show anti-cancer property. So vinblastine and vincristine display a very different clinical effects. For example, vinblastine used to treat Hodgkin's disease and metastatic testicular tumors, and vincristine is used mainly in combination with other anti-cancer drugs for the treatment of acute lymphotic leukemia, especially in children. And when you look at toxicity, again they are different. So vinblastine may cause bone marrow depression, whereas vincristine, it shows peripheral neuropathy, often proves to be dose limiting. And we have another anti-cancer compound called camptothecin. So it was first isolated by Monroe Wall and Monsuk Wani in 1966 after ethanolic extracts of Camphotheca acuminata, is the tree native to China. It showed unusual and potent anti-tumor activity. So here, the yield of the component was very, very low. That was nearly 0.01% weight by weight. Okay, suppose like if you take 1 gram, so you could see 0.01% in that, or whatever the quantity you take to extract this thing. So this is from the stem bark of Camptotheca acuminata. So here we have various derivatives. As I mentioned before, what we can do is we can tag some groups. And make derivatives. So we have camptothecin, where R1 and R2 and R3 will be just hydrogens. And then 10 hydroxy camptothecene, where R1 and R2 will be proton and R3 will be hydroxy group. And then 7 ethyl 10 hydroxy camptothecene, as the name of the compound describes, at R1 here we will have ethyl group, and then R2 it will be just proton, and then R3 it will be phenolic hydroxy group. And then topotecon, another compound, here R1 is proton, R2 is CH2 N CH3 twice, so that means dimethyl amino methyl. So what we will have at R2 position. Then R3 will be hydroxy group. Okay, so we have four compounds. Camptothecene is the natural lead compound, and the 3 compounds what we have, they are derivatives or analogs. So they are made to see whether derivatives will have superior activity or not compared to lead compound. So when we look at the mechanism of action of camptothecene, normally it binds to the covalent complex formed by topoisomerase 1 and DNA, which are known to inhibit DNA replication, and thus stabilizes the enzyme DNA complex and prevents cell proliferation. So the main mechanism, we can say that camptothecene is a topoisomerase inhibitors, even starting from lead compound till their derivatives. Okay, so some of them are were available at clinical stage, clinical and preclinical stage, and some 1 or 2 derivatives are available to treat as some of the cancer disorders. Okay, so that is the end of camptothecene. Now I'm going to take up antibiotic. So can I keep it for next hour, because it is already approaching 7:50. I will start this antibiotics in the next hour at 8 o'clock. Anyway, you are familiar with this. I'm sure you can recall many things and you can enjoy this. Until 8 o'clock, I will be available online. If you have any questions, just type and send me. I will simplify as much as possible. Okay, I will turn off the camera. I will be available online, and you can just send your questions or queries. Thank you. That are obtained from the nature. They were not the one what I'm going to discuss right now. It was not intentional, because Dr. Alexander Fleming, he was not sure that he is going to get this penams, beta lactams. So it was just serendipity. Okay, I can say an accident. So in 1929, Alexander Fleming, he published his results from his findings that the penicillium mold, that is the Penicillium chrysogenum, caused lysis of staphylococcal colonies on an agar plate. And then later, it was confirmed that it was 6-amino penicillinic acid. Okay, but 6-amino penicillinic acid is the nucleus what we see in variety of beta-lactam antibiotics. Okay, which are all synthetic, semi-synthetic. Okay, but the compound what was there to kill that organism, the microbe, was benzyl penicillin. So we have to memorize this core nucleus, where we have beta-lactam, that is 4-membered ring with nitrogen in the tertiary form, and then the carbonyl group, and then sulfur in the 5-membered ring, and 2 methyl groups next to the sulfur atom, and then the free carboxylic acid group just besides the nitrogen. And then here we will have NH and then R. So this R decides what type of beta-lactam antibiotic it is. Okay, so if it is benzyl penicillin, then R will be COCH2PH. That is benzyl group. So that is how we call it as benzyl penicillin. So benzyl is C6H5CH2. CH2. So this is benzyl, which we can see here, CH2PH. And then CO. So CO is the carbonyl group what we see. So because of this CO, the penicillin, beta-lactam antibiotics are unstable. And they are unstable in acidic conditions and also in presence of enzyme, which is beta-lactamase produced by various microorganisms. Okay, so now we have to memorize this scaffold, that is, the beta-lactam nucleus, mainly 6-amino penicillinic acid, and then add the groups, and then read the names as methicillin or ampicillin or whatever. That I will do now. For example, we have 6-amino penicillinic acid here. What I said, before. 6-amino penicillinic acid, which is 6-APA. So if you want to cut ampicillin, what you should do? You should replace this, R with this group. What is the group? It contains dimethoxy group at ortho-ortho- position, and then CO. Anyway, it is common in all the groups, which you can see here. So because of the CO group, the beta-lactam antibiotics are slightly unstable. And here we have an advantage of keeping these methoxy groups. What do they do? So they are sterically demanding 2,6-dimethoxy benzamide side chain. It was the first semi-synthetic penicillin to show resistance to staphylococcal P lactamase. That is through the compound was still acid labile. In the sense, the compound is unstable because the group what we have here is amide. Okay, so we know the nature of chemistry and nature of amide. They are highly unstable compounds. But compared to esters, they are better. But amides, if you keep them in a solution form, okay, within a few weeks or maximum few months, they are gone. They are decomposed. They are hydrolyzed, and the antibacterial properties disappear. Okay, so now we have seen the structure of methicillin. But methicillin, as we know, most of the organisms are resistant to the methicillin antibiotic. And then we have ampicillin. Again, the chemistry of this R will be different. What is the difference? So here we have CHPH, just like benzyl penicillin, but the additional group is NH2. So is there any benefit with this group? Yes. So it has an amino phenyl amido side chain, and it displays a good activity against gram-negative organisms. The improvement is it is stable to acids, and because of that it can be administered orally, although it is susceptible to degradation by P lactamases. So what we are observing here is methicillin was acid sensitive. That means it was not good for oral route of administration. Whereas ampicillin, because of this NH2, it can stabilize amide functional group. So that's the reason we can give ampicillin through oral route of administration. But still, the organism that is there that can produce enzyme called beta-lactamase, that enzyme can straight away break this amide bond and make penicillinic acid, which is not a good antibacterial substance. And then we have amoxicillin. Again, it slightly differs from ampicillin by the addition of a single hydroxy group. You can see the difference. Ampicillin, amoxicillin, the groups are almost same, but in amoxicillin, the extra group what we have here is hydroxy group. I hope it is easy for you to memorize. So differs from ampicillin by the addition of a single hydroxy group, but the compound is better absorbed by the gastrointestinal tract. Okay, before I go to the next question, somebody wrote, Dr. I think we need a refreshment for basic functional groups. Simple and brief source. Do you suggest one? You mean the reference material? You want me to explain in the, while showing structure, or what you want me to do? I didn't understand, Dr. Amal Rasul. Okay. This thing can come back to me. Well, let me continue with this. Okay, guys, now you are very clear. We have a lead structure here, and then when we change the chemistry of R, we are going to get various derivatives. So these derivatives, as I said, they are going to change with their pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic properties. So pharmacokinetic is mainly, for example, methicillin is highly unstable. That means it is acid resistant. Sorry, acid sensitive, because a trace amount of acid is good enough to hydrolyze amide and make the compound inactive. And then when you come to ampicillin, the acid stability is improved, but the enzyme that comes out of organism can still break the amide bond and make the compound inactive. So that is why ampicillin, if you take it for a very long period of time, if the microorganisms develops resistance, then your ampicillin may not show any effect on it. Okay, so that's the case. And in case of amoxicillin, the change what we made here is the hydroxy group, the phenolic hydroxy group what we added. The advantage of this is, this was the compound was showing the good absorption through oral route of administration. So now we have seen a common practice of combining beta-lactam antibiotics, mainly ampicillin or amoxicillin with clavulanic acid. What is clavulanic acid? Again, it's a chemical compound what we isolate from Streptomyces clavuligirus. When we look at the chemistry, and when you overlap this clavulanic acid with 6-amino penicillinic acid, you can see some common functional group and also common nucleus. What is the common functional group? We have carbonyl group, and then we have nitrogen, and then this is 4-membered ring. This is also 4-membered ring, and the next one is 5-membered ring. Yes, it's 5-membered ring. The only difference is here it is sulfur, here it is oxygen, and 6-amino penicillinic acid. It has a connection to connect different linkers to make different derivatives, whereas clavulanic acid, that is missing. And then in clavulanic acid, what we have here is the unsaturated alkyl, the methyl hydroxy group, whereas what we have here is 2CH3 group, and in both the cases we have carboxylic acid group. Okay, so now clavulanic acid has weak antibacterial activity, but it is potent inhibitor of P-lactamases. Okay, that means when we take a combination of clavulanic acid and any beta-lactam antibiotic, what happens? Antibiotic can target the organism, and clavulanic acid can target the enzyme that is released by a respective organism. So that is why these two combinations are excellent, and till today they have been used and practiced. For example, a mixture of clavulanic acid and P-lactamase sensitive amoxicillin was introduced in 1981 as augmentin, and it has proved to be an effective combination to combat P-lactamase producing bacteria. In 2001, even after 20 years of its launch, augmentin is still the best-selling antibacterial throughout the world. So now we can understand the impact of clonolic acid and in combination with any beta-lactam derivative. Then we are going to look at other type of antibiotic, that is streptomycin. So Selman-Waksman demonstrated the value of actinomycetes in this role, discovering the aminoglycoside streptomycin from Streptomyces gracias in 1943. So here we have a aminoglycoside antibiotic. Again, this was isolated as it is and then purified, fractionated, and then characterized with instrumental techniques to write its structure like the way it appears on the screen. And then this is another derivative called neomycin. Again, it is one of the broad spectrum antibacterial. And then we have chloramphenicol. It was isolated from Streptomyces venezuelae in 1948. But it looks like a synthetic organic molecule, but it is from the nature. So later on, they changed the chemistry of nitro to some other group, added some linkers, and tested and seen. But this compound was the best compared to any other, the synthetically made derivatives. So what I'm trying to say is the topic is lead compound, and whatever structures you are seeing on the screen, they are directly isolated from the nature. That means by the broth of the organism, or structural modified to achieve better therapeutic activity by some side effects. Okay, so here we have tetracycline derivatives. So we know that as the name is tetracyclines, they contain 4 rings with multifunctional groups around the nucleus. In case of, I've just taken only 2 derivatives. We have oxytetracycline and we have chlorotetracycline. As the name says, in case of chlorotetracycline, where we have R1, it will be chlorine here, and R2, it will be hydrogen. In case of oxytetracycline, R1 will be H and R2 will be hydroxy group. Okay, again tetracyclines. We know the drug-drug and drug-food interaction. So these tetracyclines, because of this functionality, they can form a complex with calcium. So if one knowingly or unknowingly, if you consume with milk, then the drug may not get absorbed into the system, because the structure, it is highly complex and a very big molecule. So when divalent cation is there, that is calcium, it can form a bridge between 2 molecules of tetracyclines. And then what happens? The size of the complex is so big than the absorbing sites. So that is how it will not get absorbed. When it is not absorbed, it will just eliminate as it is without showing its pharmacological activity. Then we have another compound called kanamycin. Again, we know that it's an antibacterial agent, and also it is used in other drugs to treat tuberculosis also. Okay, according to WHO guidelines classification. And then we have rifampicin. This one also antibacterial, initially identified for antibacterial property, and now in combination with other drugs can be used to treat tuberculosis also, because tuberculosis, Mycobacterium tuberculosis is also bacteria. Okay. So now we are going to look at cephalosporins. I will just show you the structure of first generation, second generation, and third generation cephalosporins. And in contrast, you can compare, your beta-lactams with cephalosporins. In beta-lactams, almost the same chemistry except this functionality, and it was 5-membered ring, whereas cephalosporins, they have 6-membered ring in place of 5-membered ring. And if you take a derivative called cephaloridine, so this is a pyridinium derivative, and it has a longer duration of action. And the group what we will have at R1 is thiophene, CH2CO, thiophene, that will appear here. And in R2, it will be pyridinium, nucleus. And then cephaloglycine, we can see glycine, the amino acid here. And then R2 will be OCOCH3. This was the first orally active cephalosporin that was, used to, that possessed, a phenyl glycine substituent at the carbon 7 side chain. Although it is, labile 3 acetoxymethyl group was retained. See here, it says, the compound is stable even though it is having ester functional group, because we know that ester functional groups are highly unstable. So maybe in this structure, based on the neighboring groups, the ester functional group is greatly supported. So that is how it can show, the stability which can be suitable for oral route of administration. And then we have another 3 derivatives called cephadroxyl, then cefaradine, and cefaclor, and cephalexin as well. So you can see change in the substitution and also change in their property. For example, replacing the acetoxy group with a proton or chlorine, for example, we have cephalexin, and then in case of cephalexin, extend the duration of action of these, orally active products. So compared to cephaloglycin, we have ester functional group at R2 position, and we have glycine group at COH group. Okay, R1 group. So if we come and see the structure of cephalexin, here we have H, that means it is CH3. So CH3, we know that it is a highly stable group, and then R1 is COCHPHNH2. So here the compound is orally active. And then in case of cephadroxyl and cephradine, again they have the same group like amoxicillin and ampicillin. What we can see, the change here is addition of hydroxy group. Otherwise R2 also proton. So cefaclor, here R2 is chlorine. So cefaclor has been classified as a second generation cephalosporin because it has a wider spectrum of activity which includes gram-negative bacteria such as Haemophilus influenza. Okay, so always we see a big difference between different generation of compounds. Okay, so in some of the cases we have seen, we could have seen first generation, second generation, third, fourth, even up to fifth generation. Okay, but in some of the cases second generation, in some of the cases third generation, it all depends on how the progress of the research in order to suppress side effects and bring about the desired quality of product. That can be selectivity, specificity, increasing the potency, whatever we account. Okay, so cefaclor has been classified as second generation cephalosporin because it has a wider spectrum activity which includes gram-negative bacteria such as Haemophilus influenza, and cefamandole, parentally administered cephalosporins with similar activities against clinically important gram-negative bacteria and also resistant to many types of P. lactamases. Okay, so there's a thing. And then in case of ceftazidime, this is a newer third generation cephalosporins, including ceftazidime and ceftriaxone. They contain amino-thiazolyl group, as we can see here, at carbon 7 side chain, been developed for treating specific pathogens such as Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Okay, so that is the advantage what we could see with third generation cephalosporins. Now I am going to touch cardiovascular drugs. So one of the most significant natural product discoveries in the last 25 years has been a fungal secondary metabolite called lovastatin. So we have a structure here. If we look at this lovastatin again, it contains multifunctional groups such as carbonyl group in the form of ester, and another carbonyl group in the form of ester within the ring, and then we have alcoholic hydroxy group, and then various stereocenters. So in spite of that, lovastatin was introduced onto the market by Merck pharmaceutical industry in the year 1987 for the treatment of hypercholesterolemia, which is a condition marked by elevated level of cholesterol in the blood. When we look at the mechanism of action of this compound, lovastatin works by inhibiting 3-hydroxy 3-methoxy-glutaryl coenzyme A, which can be abbreviated as HMG-CoA reductase. So we know that this is a key rate-limiting enzyme in the cholesterol biosynthetic pathway. So whatever statins we have as of now, so all the statins more or less they undergo, the similar type of, they show similar type of mechanism of action. Well, somebody is rightly using the marker. Can you please stop it, because that is confusing me. What you want me to do? You want me to show the things that I am explaining, which I am doing. But what you want me to do? Now I am worried the cursor is with the child or, the responsible participant. Okay, is somebody on your behalf, if you are doing marking, please stop it. Okay. So that is the thing what we see with the lovastatin. They have fixed mechanism of action. They are more to target enzyme that is responsible for making biosynthesis of cholesterol. So since this enzyme is substrate specific, so if you block that enzyme, that means no more synthesis of cholesterol and no more the problem what we see with cholesterol over deposition. Okay, so we have another statin called simvastatin. Again, this was the second HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor. Again, it was marketed by Merck pharmaceutical company, but both lovastatin and simvastatin are pro-drugs, and they are hydrolyzed to their active open chain dihydroxy acid forms in the liver. Let me show you. So here what happens, we know that this is the moiety quite unstable. So when it is hydrolyzed, what happens? This bond is broken. When this bond is broken, hydrolysis means what? When you have OH and H, okay, H will be added to this and OH will be added to this, so it becomes COH and it becomes OH. So here we see dihydroxy. One is here and whatever is added here, that will be a second. So together it will be 2. So HMG-CoA reductase, and this is the this is the thing what we see with simvastatin and lovastatin. So here also the same story. This bond is broken and hydroxy group is added over here. Hydrogen is added over here. It becomes OH and this becomes COH. So that part is necessary to bind with the enzyme to inhibit its action. So the HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors described above bind to 2 active sites on the enzyme, the hydroxymethyl-glutaryl binding domain and an adjacent hydrophobic pocket to which the decline moiety binds. So that means we have structure as a head and body. So here what happens, this is for sorry, the hydroxymethyl gluteal binding domain. So this will be sitting to one point, and this will be sitting to another point to inhibit the the enzymatic property. And the latest member of this group of cholesterol-lowering drugs, what AstraZeneca developed was rosuvastatin, and the structure is here. Okay, if you compare with levastatin and simvastatin, it is slightly different because it has heterocyclic ring, 6-membered heterocyclic ring, and then it has sulfonyl moiety, and then we have dihydroxy alkyl carboxylic acid group, and on top of it we have parafluoro, and this drug is excellent. And the other type of cardiovascular drugs are based on adrenaline, and then propranolol and atenolol. And we know that the true clinical potential of beta adrenoreceptor blocking agents for treating angina or atrial fibrillation or tachycardia was first recognized by James Black and colleagues, and they noted a report from Neil Moran and Emory from Emory University in 1958, showing that dichloroisoprenaline antagonists the effects of adrenaline on heart rate and muscle tension. Very simply, see, we have dichloroisoprenaline. I will show you in the next slide. So here we have pronetolol and propranolol. So propranolol, we know that it is blocker, the first effective beta adrenoreceptor blocker, and then pronetolol and marked for limited use in 1963. Toxicity problems soon led pronetolol to be replaced by one naphthyl analog, that is propranolol. So before, this was the blocker, beta receptor blocker, but because of the toxicity they had to switch over to this propranolol. And when you look at the structural difference, both of these compounds, they have naphthyl ring, but in case of pronetolol, the substitution is at this point. In case of propranolol, the substitution at the top side. Anyway, before that, let me complete this. And then compounds with improved selectivity for the beta adrenoreceptor of cardiac muscle, beta 1 adrenoreceptor blockers were to follow, including atenolol, what we have here, which became the most frequently prescribed beta blocker and one of the best selling drugs of the time. And then under anti-asthmatic drugs, okay, here I can just take back you to autonomic nervous system drugs, what you have studied, in your previous curriculum. See here, we have a structure called adrenaline. We know its structure. It is catecholamine, compound. So adrenaline or epinephrine, it can bind to alpha receptor as well as beta receptor. So to increase selectivity, propranolol was developed and atenolol was developed to increase the selectivity as a blockers. Okay, so that's the thing. Anyway, I will repeat it once again when I take you to anti-asthmatic drugs. Right? Okay, so anti-asthmatic drugs, here we have ephedrine, isoprenaline, and salbutamol. Here the Chinese have been using a plant extract known as ma hong to treat asthma and hay fever from 1,000 years ago. The extract is prepared from several species of ephedra, a small leafless shrub found in China. So if you take this compound called ephedrine, it has 2 chiral centers, and because of 2 chiral centers, we can see 4 stereoisomers, and all four behaves differently, but one of the stereoform can show better activity, so that may be nearly 36 times better than the least showing compound. And here Peking Union Medical College and the University of Pennsylvania, and the Mayo Clinic in the United States, they developed the active ingredient, and then the ephedrine was introduced into Western medicine in 1926 as a orally active bronchodilator for the treatment of acute asthma. Because if you look at bronchodilation, that is again due to the receptor, mediated through receptor response. So that means ephedrine can bind to the receptors that are commonly seen. Okay, so ephedrine, we have a structure of ephedrine, we have a structure of adrenaline, it is also called as epinephrine, and isoprenaline or isoproterenol. So here if you look at all these three structures, this is adrenergic receptor agonist, and again this is adrenaline. We know that again is adrenergic receptor agonist. The receptor can be alpha or beta in nature, or subtypes of alpha or beta. But isoproterenol or isoprenaline is beta receptor antagonist. So what we can do with agonist and antagonist? Let us see the difference. So ephedrine is related to another natural product that has been used to treat asthma, that is adrenaline hormone. That is adrenaline, which is also called as epinephrine. So here adrenaline is a potent agonist at both alpha and beta adrenergic receptors. Again, whatever alpha subtypes or beta subtypes, receptors. So it produces arterial hypertension as an undesirable side effect. So in 1951, the synthetic analog called isoprenaline was introduced, and nearly more than 20 years it was considered the drug of choice for treating bronchospasm associated with acute asthmatic attack. So later on, what they did was, isoproterenol was not good enough in terms of its selectivity. Okay, because it was non-selective, it could go to any beta receptor, that can be beta 1 receptor or beta 2 receptors. So later advancements, they described that the colterol or metaproterenol or albuterol or terbutaline, they can target only beta 2 receptor as agonist. We know that beta 2 receptor is in the bronchial muscle, and when it is relaxed, we can see relaxation. So that is the treatment what one can see with asthma. Okay, I hope it is clear to you. So I'll just revise once again. We have ephedrine and adrenaline. They are agonists. They are non-selective. They can bind to any of the adrenergic receptors and bring about all responses. One response could be in our favor to treat asthma disorder, but other responses will be kind of severe side effects. So to avoid this, what they did, they took the structure of adrenaline as a natural lead structure, and then they did various substitutions. They converted hydroxy to some other form, and then this monomethylamine to some other form, then this hydroxy to chlorine, methoxy, methyl, blah blah blah. Then they looked at the selectivity towards the receptor, both for agonist and antagonist. And with isoprenaline or isoproterenol, they found that this molecule can block the beta receptor. But in general, beta receptors, but the beta receptors can be beta 1 or beta 2. If it stimulates beta 1, then it leads, the overactivation of cardiac tissue. That is, the over functioning of, the cardiac system, again, which is not required here. So they were hunting for a very selective compound, and then they were able to identify these 4 compounds. Now these 4 compounds are very much available in the market with different brand names. For example, terbutaline with Bricanyl. I am not sure it is popular in Kingdom, but definitely it is popular in the Europe and US. And then metaproterenol again, popular with alupine, and then albuterol or salbutamol, also called as salbutamol, and it is popular with a brand name called Ventolin. Well, these formulations, they are available in different formulations as a tablet or as a nebulizer, whatever, and they are very effective, medications. Now we are moving on to antiparasitic drugs. When we say antiparasitic drugs, artemisinin, nobody can forget it, because this was a drug won Nobel Prize after several years of battling with the molecule. Here Artemisia annua, again sweet wormwood Qinghao, has been used in Chinese medicine for over 1,000 years. So modern development states from the isolation of highly active antimalarial artemisinin drug in 1972. You have 2 structures besides each other. One is artemisinin and the other one is adduct. Can any one of you spot what is the difference between these 2? If you are really listening to my explanation, can you spot what is the difference? Exactly. In case of artemisinin, we can see 2 oxygens that are connected to 7-membered. They are in the 7-membered ring. Whereas in case of adduct, it is reduced, and what we have here is only 1 oxygen. Otherwise, the remaining is same. All right. So we can say that the adduct is a derivative, and artemisinin is the lead compound what we obtained from the nature. Okay, we did a small change, that is, we converted this, we converted 2 oxygen into 1 oxygen. Is there any difference? Yes, there is a big difference. What is the difference? Artemisinin is a sesquiterpene lactone with an unusual peroxide bridge. We know hydrogen peroxide molecular formula H2O2. So what it does, it is highly unstable, it undergoes decomposition, it gives water molecule and radical oxygen that can kill the organism wherever we apply, or to some extent that can damage even the cell components also. Okay, to some extent, depending on the concentration. So artemisinin is sesquiterpene lactone with an unusual peroxide bridge. One of the earliest modifications involved catalytic reduction of this peroxide moiety, resulting in loss of 1 oxygen and total loss of antimalarial activity in the adduct. Even though these 2 structures look similar, except 2 oxygens in artemisinin and 1 oxygen in adduct completely free from antimalarial property, because this oxygen is very, very important. Let us try to understand why that oxygen is very, very important. Because the drug has high affinity for hemozoin. You know what it is? You know what is hemozoin? A storage form of hemin that is retained by the parasite after digestion of hemoglobin, leading to a highly selective accumulation of the drug by the parasite. Artemisinin then decomposes in the presence of iron, probably from the hemozoin, and releases free radicals which kills the parasite. Actually, this is the mechanism of action of artemisinin. So the peroxide bridge is therefore crucial part of the drug molecule for its mechanism of action, and it is also suspected from its structural activity studies also. For example, we have another molecule at right side, what I have circled in red color. That is also peroxide bridged compound isolated from some other species called Artabotrytis unicinotus, and this one also has antimalarial activity. Now, here what we can suspect is whatever is the core, but this is very important for antimalarial property, because it can release the radical that can kill the parasite. Now we have artemisinin structure here, and we have some of the derivative structure here. We have a scaffold. I have marked it as OR. Let us see what R is. Suppose if R is H, then what happens? We call it as a derivative. The name of the derivative is dihydroartemisinin, and this is more active than parent compound. So that means we have achieved something here. What is that potency of the compound? And then if R is CH3, then it is artemether. If it is ethyl, arteether. Again, depending on the functional group, we call the compound. If R is COCH2CH2CONA, that is, it is a sodium salt of artesunate. We can say it is a prodrug. It is given through intravenous route. It is given through intravenous route because I said prodrug, because we are adding succinic acid here, and then we are making a sodium salt. So we know that salts are polar and it is soluble in water, polar solvent. We can make whatever desired formulation and we can give it through whatever route of injection form, like the route of administration, the parenteral route of administration. So water solubility can be greatly improved by esterification with succinic acid and conversion to its sodium salt. And we have quinine and quinine, chloroquine, and mefloquine. The structure what we have here is a quinine. We know that it is isolated from the cinchona bark, and it contains the bark contains nearly 5% of the alkaloid. So this high concentration permitted genuinely therapeutic doses of a bark to be given and allowed the pure alkaloid to be isolated as early as 1820. The first completely correct structure came in 1922. You can see the difference. It was isolated and explored for antimalarial property, but the structure was confirmed in the year 1922. And finally, the total synthesis of this compound was done in the year 1945. Again, the synthesis was not that easy because you can count the number of stereo centers and also the type of ring systems. So this is this synthesis of this is very easy, but synthesis of this blue color is very tough. So that's the reason it took so long to identify the proper synthetic scheme or route to achieve this compound. Anyway, so we have two more compounds called pamaquine and primaquine. Again, if you look at these two structures, they are exactly same except this chemistry. So here we have NH2. So the first of the 8 aminoquinolines to be introduced into medicine was pamaquine. There are various analogs where the chemistry of this was changed, but this was ideal to introduce as antimalarial drug to treat malaria. And then quinacrine, we have chloroquine, and we have mefloquine. If you look at all the structure, quinacrine, if you consider quinacrine as a lead compound, and then chloroquine can be a synthetic compound or its derivative, because if you dissect the molecule, this piece, that is 1 and 2, they are exactly same, except this part is not there in chloroquine. And in case of mefloquine, it is different, because what we have here is cyclic 6-membered heterocyclic ring. So quinacrine is a derivative of both quinine and 9-aminoacridine. What we have here, it combined a known antimalarial with a known antimicrobial property. So that is the unique property of this. It has both antimalarial and antimicrobial properties. So the result was useful. Relatively non-toxic antimalarial property was there. Although it stained the skin and eyeballs yellow. That is a side effect of what we could see. But anyway, it was nothing. The side effect was nothing, but it was used as malarial and microbial compound. So we have chloroquine and we have hydroxychloroquine. Chloroquine, we know that it is antimalarial drug. Hydroxychloroquine, yes, it is also antimalarial drug. Other than that, hydroxychloroquine was used nowadays to treat, the problem that we are facing all over the world. But still, US FDA has declared in one of the report that the use of hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine to treat hospitalized patients, no connection between the COVID, what we are seeing from last couple of months, because the drug what I'm describing is for anti-malarial, but somehow someone identified that this hydroxychloroquine can kill the coronavirus. So that is how it is being exploited as antiviral drug. But US FDA, they made a statement that hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine to treat hospitalized patients with COVID-19 is now available. This includes reports of serious heart rhythm problem and other safety issues, blood and lymph system disorders, kidney injuries, and liver problems and failure. So what does it mean is, this drug is advised to take in presence of a physician, with the proper prescription and all, but one simply cannot buy and fix their own dose and take. It is not a correct procedure. Okay, so in conclusion, whatever the lead compound you have seen so far, they were always beneficial to the pharmaceutical industry to develop a better drug molecule with least side effects or whatever. So that means natural product research has been the single most successful strategy for discovering new pharmaceuticals and has contributed dramatically to extend human life and improving clinical practice. As long as nature continues to yield novel, diverse chemical entities possessing selective biological activities, definitely natural products will play an important role as leads for new pharmaceuticals. So in this lecture, what I explained was the lead compound from the plants or lead compounds from the bacterial influence, and lead compound mainly from the plants. But other than that, lead compounds what we have until now are from fungi, even some various marine sources like snail, frog, reptiles, snakes. Okay, so we've obtained the lead compound from all sort of the possible sources. But anyway, thank you so much for your patience. If you have any questions, I will answer. I hope this has given some information about the lead compounds, what we've obtained to treat various disorders, Okay, so there are many things, but I could simplify and I could accommodate in precisely in these 2 hours. Otherwise, I have given you the reference material Berger. If you read that book, you will find lot. But I cannot address all those because here I should understand the limitation in terms of time allotment and also the total content. Okay, so how can we get this lecture? Which functional groups makes the drug orally active? Well, if you have some of the labile functional groups, labile in the sense of delicate or sensitive functional groups like ester. So ester or amides, they are not suitable for oral route of administration at all because we know that they are highly delicate. And the moment when they get into the system, we know various enzymes, acid influences, many things are there. So before they get absorbed, such compounds can be hydrolyzed or decomposed. Even to some extent, even if they got absorbed and enter into the system, we know various enzymes again in the in the circulatory fluid, so they can bombard and damage the molecules. For example, various local anesthetic substance, they're all either amides or esters. So we know that anyway, local anesthetics, depending on the dose, we should give it at their desired the site of area. For example, you have seen antibiotics called the penicillin beta-lactam antibiotics. So beta-lactam antibiotics, not every antibiotic is stable for oral route of administration. Only few. So what is going on with some that are unstable and some that are stable? Again, the functionality. They may have similar functionality, but you will find the additional group that supports the functional group for easy way of to prevent easy way of hydrolysis. So the supporting functional group makes the molecule orally active. Or if you have highly unstable group, okay, we can find a way to convert that into a prodrug form, and then we can administer. And we know that prodrugs, when they reach their site of action, they can lose the extra group that is added, and they go back to the active form, and then find a way to bind to the target and show their respective pharmacological property. Any other questions? Okay, what I will do, I will post this lecture material if you want on the course content. So just for your reference, you can just go and practice the structures, whatever. Okay, and if you have any questions, you can just type and send. I'll be here for another 5-10 minutes, and I can reply back. Anyway, I turn off your camera. Yeah, I will make this video available on the folder called recorded lectures. Whenever you find time, you can listen to it. I got a suggestion regarding last lecture, especially the introduction to pharmaceutical chemistry. I heard some that some noise in between, and the voice was very low. So what I will do is I'll make a slide of the PowerPoint slide of the presentation. Again, I will post it on the course content folder, so you can just download as a PDF and you can just read, because that was really rich in terms of drug discovery. Addressed many things. For example, in that you could have seen the salicin, how aspirin was developed, how aspirin is available in the current market, who what was the basis, the willow bark of the beautiful tree, that was the base to get the salicin, and then pharmaceutical industries, they interfered and to make business, profit out of it. They converted into different forms, and finally they arrived at a structure called aspirin. Now aspirin is a super drug, till today in the market for various reasons, as an analgesic or as a to prevent the cardiac problems. Anyway, so thank you so much. I will stop now. Still you can contact me on mail, in my institutional mail ID. Okay, I will reply to you. Okay, so thank you. I will account your attendance and I will log out now. Thanks a lot. Have a nice evening. Take care. Bye. Keep safe.